Timothy Lawrence, Princess Anne's devoted husband, has long remained a quiet figure within the royal fold, steering clear of palace intrigues and whispers. After years of silence, he has finally revealed Camilla's darkest secret, and it is far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. This revelation does not merely raise eyebrows, it threatens to shake the very foundations of the monarchy itself. For so long, the truth was hidden behind palace walls. Why is it only being revealed now? The answer is chilling, scandalous, and impossible to ignore. The rivalry between Princess Anne and Queen Camilla is etched deeply into royal history. Sir Timothy Lawrence has always been the picture of discretion, a man content to stand just behind his wife while chaos swirled through the monarchy. Yet those close to him suggest that few people have seen the royal family's fractures as clearly as he has. At his side, Anne has never been afraid to show her blunt edge. Nowhere was this sharpness felt more than in her dealings with Queen Camilla. Unlike rivalries born of sudden conflict, theirs has been woven through decades of entanglement. Long before Camilla stepped into Charles's life, Anne shared a close bond with Andrew Parker Bowles, a man she admired but could not marry due to royal restrictions. When Andrew married Camilla in 1973, Anne's personal disappointment became a quiet wound. Years later, when Camilla married Charles, that wound deepened into something far more complicated, family tension layered on top of personal history. For her part, Camilla was never comfortable in Anne's presence. Palisades often whispered that she found an intimidating Anne was impossible to charm. Quick to dismiss pleasantries, fiercely independent, and devoted to tradition. Their interactions in public were civil, but behind closed doors, the strain was unmistakable. The most visible clash came during King Charles's coronation. When Camilla insisted on being styled simply as Queen, Anne reportedly found this audacious. For the Princess Royal, steeped in protocol and duty, such liberties crossed a line. Sir Timothy, quiet and observant, stood close enough to see how these frustrations reignited long-buried tensions. What began as a romance decades earlier evolved into one of the monarchy's longest-running rivalries, an unspoken clash between two women, whose opposing natures seemed destined to collide. Through it all, Timothy quietly observed as history's discord replayed itself within palace walls. But who exactly is Sir Timothy? And what mysteries linger behind those guarded doors? Timothy Lawrence's life was shaped by the sea, with steady discipline, sharp instincts, and a habit of keeping his emotions beneath the surface. He rose to the rank of Vice Admiral in the Royal Navy. Storms and uncertainty were nothing new to him, yet nothing in his career prepared him for the storm he found brewing within the monarchy after marrying Princess Anne in 1992. For years, he remained discreet, never craving the spotlight, quietly supporting his wife and steering clear of palace intrigue. By 2025, however, even his calm reserve was tested. What he was witnessing could no longer be ignored. Camilla's presence in the royal household had always unsettled Anne, and Timothy initially attributed it to his wife's famously blunt nature. But over time, he began to notice patterns, subtle, deliberate moves that suggested something far more calculated. Each year revealed another piece of the puzzle, until it became impossible to dismiss the idea that Camilla's ambitions stretched well beyond the role of supportive consort. Her past was already entangled in controversy. Decades earlier, her affair with Charles had helped unravel his marriage to Princess Diana, a scandal that nearly toppled the monarchy. Anne had never forgiven the betrayal, especially after Andrew Parker Bowles, her old flame, confided to Timothy that Camilla had neglected her own children while entangling herself in Charles and Diana's marriage. I began to understand. You know what was happening in my own mind? And in hers most of all. The shadows of the past clung tightly to her. Yet Timothy soon realized that it was her present actions that caused even greater concern. As King Charles's health faltered, Camilla began to subtly adjust her posture. In family meetings, she no longer spoke as a supportive consort, but as though she herself were guiding the crown. Timothy noticed how she inserted herself into conversations about succession and the Regency Act, adopting the air of a monarch in waiting. Even her dealings with William and Catherine grew heavy-handed, full of unsolicited advice and, at times, thinly veiled lectures about their roles. To Timothy, this looked like overreach. To Anne, it was open defiance. The manipulation did not end there. Camilla gradually took control of access to Charles, presenting it as an act of protecting his peace, and often returned home frustrated, recounting how visits with her brother were suddenly cancelled, while invitations to gatherings at Clarence House conveniently left her name off the list. Timothy himself felt the sting of Camilla's words, whispered remarks to courtiers that Anne was too distracted by her horses to understand leadership, or insinuations that William's modern outlook posed a danger to the crown's future. These were not harmless asides. They were deliberate attempts to sow doubt and establish herself as indispensable. Meanwhile, the press began to shift in her favor. Headlines praised Camilla as the steadfast queen, holding the monarchy together, a narrative that conveniently erased Anne's decades of tireless service and overlooked William and Catherine's growing responsibilities. To Timothy, these glowing reports could not be coincidence. They were the result of careful cultivation by Camilla's allies. With each article, the rift within the family deepened, stoking Anne's anger and making it harder for Timothy to remain silent. Then came Royal Ascot in 2025. The day glittered with tradition, horses racing down the track, extravagant hats swaying in the sun, cameras flashing at every turn. Yet Timothy's eyes stayed fixed on the king. Charles appeared pale, his energy draining with every passing hour. It was there, amid the chatter and celebration, that Timothy overheard Camilla lean toward an advisor and whisper words that froze him more than any gale at sea. "This throne must remain in my hands forever. No matter what happens to Charles," the sentence lingered like ice in the air. For the first time, Timothy no longer saw Camilla as merely a difficult in-law, but as something far more dangerous. In that moment, the quiet naval officer knew he could not remain an observer. He would have to search for answers no matter where they led. But was Camilla's chilling remark at Ascot simply careless, or was it the key to a plot hidden in plain sight? Stay with us, because what Timothy uncovered next would change everything. Behind the velvet curtains of Clarence House, silence carried more weight than words. Secrets lived in the corners, as though even the walls had sworn their loyalty. Yet one truth clawed its way out, the truth that Sir Timothy Lawrence stumbled upon. What he overheard was not idle chatter from a queen anxious for her husband, but the skeleton of a long-buried scheme polished into something darker. King Charles had worn the crown for only a few short years before illness drained the vigor that once defined him. His public image bore the toll of treatment, thinning features, weary eyes, and a faltering presence. To the outside world, it was the cruel reality of cancer. But Timothy's discovery suggested something far more sinister. Rumor had it that Camilla had cornered Charles's physician with chilling instructions: ease back the chemotherapy. Not enough to end his life, but just enough to leave him fragile, dependent, and stripped of authority. A king alive in name, yet too weak to stand against her hand at the reins. For the doctor, there was no real choice. Family and career alike dangled as hostages to silence. What struck Timothy most was not only the audacity of the plot, but the cold precision behind it. Camilla's whispers were deliberate, her threats sharpened to leave no room for doubt. This was not the portrait of a grieving consort, but of a woman tightening her grip on power, while her husband's strength ebbed away. Charles's illness also exposed another scheme, one aimed at Princess Anne, weakened and drained. The king was cornered not by politics, but by the woman closest to him. Camilla, ever watchful, pressed a stack of documents into his hands. They seemed routine, the sort of legal forms a tired monarch might sign without hesitation. But beneath the bland wording hid something sinister. A transfer of authority that would place Princess Anne's cherished inheritance directly under Camilla's control. These assets were more than financial. They represented Anne's independence, entrusted to her by Queen Elizabeth II herself. Hospitals, equestrian programs, and countless community projects thrived because of those funds. To Anne, they were symbols of duty and identity. To Camilla, they were power resources she could wield to tighten her grip. Charles resisted, but guilt and emotional blackmail wore him down. Camilla played the vulnerable spouse, reminding him that her security was his responsibility. For a man already battling fear and frailty, saying no became impossible. And yet the truth did not stay buried. It surfaced not through Anne's suspicions or Timothy's watchfulness, but through the courage of Edward Thompson, a servant who had long endured the quiet cruelties of palace life. For years he had lived in the shadows of whispers and veiled threats until finally stepped forward. One night he overheard Camilla cornering the king's physician with an ultimatum sharp as a blade. His hands trembled as he slipped his phone from his pocket and recorded every word. That recording soon reached Sir Timothy, and watching it left him shaken. A surge of anger mixed with dread because what he now held was no longer rumor or suspicion, but undeniable proof that Camilla's ambition had crossed into criminal betrayal. The monarchy itself teetered on the edge, and Timothy knew he could no longer remain silent. With the weight of that knowledge pressing down on him, he resolved to tell Charles everything, even if it meant shattering the king's world from within. But what happens when the very woman sworn to stand beside a king is revealed as the architect of his undoing? Keep watching, because the truth Charles uncovered would leave even his closest allies stunned. Charles, the broken king, had always believed loyalty was the one constant in his turbulent reign. Through decades of scandal, criticism, and public judgment, he had clung to the certainty that Camilla's devotion was unshakable. That certainty collapsed the moment he learned the truth. What he mistook for comfort now appeared to be strategy, carefully disguised in gentle touches and whispered reassurances. The revelation forced him backward in memory, his thoughts returning to the quiet disapproval of Queen Elizabeth II. She had never shouted her judgment, never confronted her son openly, but her distance had been impossible to miss. At his wedding, she had offered only the barest courtesy, avoiding photographs that might be read as approval. Charles once thought her coldness unfair, the conservatism of an older era. But now her silence rang in his ears like a warning he had chosen not to hear. Even the intimate moments that had once given him strength now seemed poisoned in hindsight. The long hours of chemotherapy when Camilla sat beside him. Was she waiting for his recovery, or guarding her advantage while his strength ebbed away? Each remembered word of comfort twisted into suspicion. What had once been his shield against despair now felt like the very reason his spirit was breaking. Yet personal anguish was not what weighed heaviest. The shame that haunted him came from what this betrayal meant for everyone else. His children were already scarred by years of scandal. Anne had carried duty all her life without complaint. William and Kate were preparing for a future he might not live to secure. By defending Camilla so stubbornly, he had blinded himself and bound them all to her schemes. The crown no longer felt like a symbol of duty, but like a burden crushing the last of his strength. For the first time, Charles wondered not how long he could reign, but whether he deserved to reign at all. And as the weight of betrayal pressed deeper, one fear loomed larger than his own downfall. How would the monarchy survive when the storm reached his heir? Inside the palace, the storm was already brewing. Prince William was not a man easily shaken. His public life had trained him to maintain the calm composure expected of a future king. Yet when the recording of Camilla's threats filled the room, that composure splintered. The voice on the tape sharp, cold, deliberate left no doubt. To William, it was not political maneuvering or petty jealousy. It was cruelty with intent. His expression shifted from pale disbelief to a fury so intense that the advisors seated around him barely recognized the heir they thought they knew. What struck him hardest was not only the betrayal of his father, but the method. Slow, deliberate weakening. Enough to keep Charles alive, but too fragile to rule. To William, this was not scandal. It was treachery. He rose swiftly from his chair and declared that the matter could no longer remain whispers within family walls. The monarchy itself was endangered, and action had to be immediate, decisive, and absolute. While William's anger gave the room its momentum, Princess Anne's heartbreak gave it its weight. Known for her iron discipline and sharp tongue, and rarely displayed emotion. But as the recording played, she lowered her head and wept not for herself, but for the brother she had always shielded. Her tears soon hardened into resolve. She reminded the council of their late mother's will, of Elizabeth II's clear wish that Anne's charitable funds remain untouched and her independence safeguarded. Camilla's attempt to strip that away, and argued, was not only illegal, but an insult to the queen's memory. For hours, the palace council wrestled with the consequences. Advisors, lawyers, and long-serving confidants weighed every angle. Should the public ever know? Could the monarchy withstand the revelation that the queen consort herself had schemed against the king? These questions hung in the air like thunderclouds. Yet the evidence left little room for argument. Silence would not protect the crown. It would rot it from within. Gradually, hesitation dissolved. William and Anne, standing side by side, commanded a unity the monarchy had rarely seen since Elizabeth's reign. The council agreed. Camilla would be stripped of authority. Every financial channel she had tried to seize would be pulled back under William and Anne's joint oversight. Her position would survive only in title. Queen consort in name, ceremonial shadow, with no influence left to wield. One final decision was made. The truth, though undeniable, would remain locked inside palace walls. Exposure would risk dismantling not only Camilla, but the fragile image of the crown itself. And so, secrecy became the shield of survival. Yet, as the council's decree settled over the room, one thought lingered unspoken. Camilla had no idea that her carefully built power was about to vanish. How she would respond once the veil was lifted remained the question none dared to answer. What happens when a queen who fought her way to the throne discovers that her power has been stolen in silence? Stay tuned, because Camilla's reaction was nothing short of explosive. This was the fall of Camilla's power. When Camilla first realized that her hidden schemes had been exposed, fear never crossed her face. Instead, what surged within her was a storm of rage so fierce that the halls of Clarence House echoed with her voice. Witnesses described her as restless, prowling the room like an animal robbed of its prey. Her hands shook while her words struck like fire. For years, she had climbed step by careful step until she stood at the very heart of the monarchy itself. Now, in a single turn, that dream threatened to vanish. Her fury demanded a target, and she fixed it on Sir Timothy Lawrence. In her mind, he had pried too deeply, disturbed the silence she had fought to maintain, and exposed what she had wished to bury forever. Desperation drove her to issue a chilling command to one of her closest aides, a command to silence him. But the plot never took root. And like each one of you here, she loved to write. For a decade, she wrote poem. It was clumsy, reckless, and intercepted almost immediately. When word of this attempt reached the royal council, their suspicions hardened into certainty. Camilla was not merely ambitious. She was dangerous. That failure marked the beginning of her undoing. Every corridor of the palace began to feel hostile. Once, she had walked those halls with calculated poise, weaving influence through whispers and smiles. Now she moved restlessly, haunted by the gaze of servants and advisors. Convinced that every glance carried accusation, her thoughts spun with desperate ideas, ways to regain ground, to silence her enemies, to claw her way back to control. Yet each idea crumbled into the same truth. She had been cornered. The final blow did not come with shouting or confrontation. It arrived quietly, sealed in a plain envelope marked with the crest of the royal council. Camilla tore it open, her hands trembling, and read the words that stripped her life's work apart. In the cold language of legal decree, every authority she had claimed was revoked. Executive power, financial control, influence within the crown, all gone. She would remain queen consort in title only, reduced to a ceremonial figure with no weight behind her name. Asterisk. Those who saw her afterward never forgot her expression. The paper tore beneath her grip, her knuckles white, the color draining from her skin. Wash-mounted pony. And I remember there was a very large horseshoe next door to us called Ditching Hall. For decades, she had fought to stand beside Charles as his equal, believing destiny itself had placed her there. Now, the dream she had sacrificed so much for had dissolved into dust. The letter slipped from her hand, falling silently to the floor. She sat motionless, staring at nothing, until the first tears broke through. These were not tears for Charles, nor for the family fractured by her ambition. They were tears for herself, for the vision of power that had collapsed forever. That night, she stood before a mirror, confronting a reflection she hardly recognized. She was no longer the queen she had once imagined, but an aging woman with hollow eyes staring back. By morning, her defiance was gone. She retreated into her rooms, refusing to see anyone. The palace, once her triumph, had become her prison. So, what do you think? Was the council's decision enough for Camilla's actions, or should harsher punishment have been served? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.